Okay, so we're joined today by Richard Gallen, who is the Spider Recording Scheme organizer for the British Arachnological Society. And Richard's going to talk to us today about the rarities in arachnology and delve a bit into finding and recording rare spiders in Britain. So over to you, Richard.
Okay, thanks, Kieran. Okay, yeah, today we're going to take a little tour through rare spiders in Britain. And we're just going to I'm going to sort of showcase a few examples and how to go about actually targeting rarities as opposed to your common or garden spiders. Okay. Right, a few rare spider mantras that I've sort of invented over the years. So rare spiders often live in difficult to survey habitats. So that's sort of pointing you towards going to places where nobody else goes because maybe it's too wet, or maybe it's looks a bit dangerous, or it's a bit hard to get to. So just bear that in mind. It's always worth thinking when you're going out recording. Don't go to where everyone else goes recording. Go to somewhere different. Try different habitat. They like rare habitats. So by definition, if a spider is associated with a very rare habitat, and only that rare habitat, it's going to be rare itself. So think about that as well. Always worth trying to match these things to help you find these rarities by being inferred by other aspects of natural history. Another thing you need to look for are large tracts of good quality old habitat, because that's more likely to be supporting something that's very fussy about its requirements, ecological requirements. So don't go looking in a car park at the back of a supermarket or something like that. You will find spiders, but they're not going to be the real gem spiders. They're going to be sort of things that you find everywhere. They're not so tied to very unusual habitats. So think about that. Go for somewhere where there's good, like the view behind me, for instance, big area, not too agriculturally modified, and yeah, things like that. Okay, so they're essentially the three mantras to think about when you're going out targeting rare spiders. So what I'm going to do is show you a few case studies that I've been involved with and show you how I managed to focus in on the habitats and what little tricks and tips you can use to help inform your search. Okay, so this is an unusual little spider that very rarely turns up. You can see the distribution map there in the top right corner. Very scattered distribution, very few modern records actually. So I was approached by Natural Resources Wales to say, well, can you re-find this at a site where we've had it before? We've had it pitfall trapped there back in 2011, but we've got no other records, and we want to know exactly where on the NAR it occurs and what is it doing. So yeah, I sort of looked at this thing and I thought, well, I've never actually seen this spider before. So I got in my excuses very early and said, well, yeah, to be honest with you, I think it's a long shot whether we're even going to find this thing. I've never seen it. It's very infrequently found in Britain. Chances are pretty low, but if you're up for it, I'll give it a shot, but don't expect a positive report. So with that in mind, they said, yeah, okay, we'll give it a shot and we'll see what we can find. So what did we do? Well, first thing I decided to do was hit the internet, go on the spider recording website, see what's actually written about this species. So that's a sort of little extract from the information on there. So species has been, I can't even read that, it's hiding behind a caption, but various habitats: salt marsh, calcareous grassland, beneath the stones on a riverbed, birch and pine litter, sand dunes, bracken, sugar beet fields, and a tin mine. Its true habitat is not thought to be identified. It may be subterranean. Well, yeah, it's quite a wide search area. That sounds like it occurs everywhere. Well, yeah, does it? And I sort of thought, well, yeah, obviously they've got this information from somewhere, but there's no underlying references to go back to. So I decided to have a look deeper. Let's go back in time. Let's go and look at the original source material for when people started finding this species in Britain and see if that had a bit more information. I was none the wiser from this. I could have been searching anywhere, even the back garden, to look for this job, so I need to hone it down a bit. Okay, so yeah, the phenology looks right. It does seem to be more frequently found in the autumn, so makes sense. We'll do an autumn survey for this. More alarmingly, most of the SRS records, there was only 19 with this information, but it was all pitfall material. So, okay, well, we might have to involve pitfall traps in this survey to try and find this thing. Under stones, vacuum sampling, well, yeah, if that's a pie chart of 19, that probably represents one record each. So maybe that's not the best thing to try, really. Okay, so we went back and we looked at the famous Lockett and Millage book. That's often the sort of go-to historical spider book that you'd use. And sure enough, okay, under stones embedded in mudflats. Well, there's a little bit more information, isn't it? Amongst marram grass and sandhills, adults in autumn. Well, okay, it suggests that earlier text was probably taken from this information, but where did this information come from? Lockett and Millage certainly haven't found this spider, otherwise there'd be a bit more information there. It seems still a bit general, and stones embedded in mudflats. That sounds like it's underwater. It's unlikely, doesn't it? There's a terrestrial spider in the sea. Okay, let's see where Lockett and Millage got their information from. Okay, let's go back to Jackson, Victorian Edwardian spider recorder from the northwest. He was the first to find it in Britain, so it makes sense that he might have some more information. So I did some digging and I found the original reference to it. Sure enough, there we go. There's a lot more information going on here, actually. The spider occurs in very deeply embedded stones on the shore, just above high water tide of the spring tides. Well, that's not exactly stones bedded in a mudflat, is it? Mudflat, I assume, has been that devoid area where you get lugworms and things like that. The original reference isn't sort of inferring that. Okay, that's interesting. And historically, this record was always thought to be from Cheshire. Well, Queensferry isn't in Cheshire, it's actually Wales. So, okay, we're getting some anomalies here that we've got to check. You've got to go back to this original text. Okay, he's saying large salt marshes here covered in thrift and other shore plants. Each springtide, spiders' homes must get flooded out with the stones which they live. Okay, well, that's confirmation from somebody who's actually found the spider that its stones, not actually on the mudflats, but they're sort of on salt marsh, which could potentially get flooded by a tide. Okay, so that's giving us a little bit more information. A bit more digging. Went to a later Hull reference, and sure enough, Hull's obviously travelled down from Northumbria. He was obviously keen to see this spider. He had quite an interest in subterranean things, and clearly Randall Jackson had told him exactly where to find it. And he reaffirms that this is the only British location, tidal water of the Dee, where it lives under well-embedded stones. Okay, so he's found it in the same place that Jackson had it. And then a bit later, he sort of reiterates where he found it. He's saying stones more or less firmly embedded in the sandy soil. Well, sandy soil isn't mudflat, is it? So, okay, these are two people that have actually seen this spider in the wild. I'm going to go with this information really, rather than the sort of Chinese whispers of sort of secondary information and stuff. So he definitely said it's a subterranean species. So yeah, we're looking at a subterranean species. And if you think back to the picture of the very spider, it is small and pale. It's got very small eyes. So that's all fitting in with it being subterranean, really. Right. So they wanted me to survey Newborough Warren. For those that don't know, this is in North Wales. So in the bottom corner of Anglesey there, in southwest Anglesey. Huge tract of sand dunes and associated plantation. So there's a big Corsican pine plantation over about half of the dune system. And it's a big triple SI, as you can see outlined in red here. So not a lot to go on. I was told that the original pitfalls were in this area, highlighting now, in the west side of the area, near the forest. And I thought, well, makes sense to start there. Better place than anywhere to start. But because so little is known about it, I'm going to try searching far and wide across the site and see. That could have just been a wandering specimen, for instance. The true habitat isn't quite known. So let's try right across. And they're 1 kilometre squares. So it was quite a big survey, and I needed to travel around on a bike, which was quite interesting. I hadn't ridden a bike for quite a while, so I got fairly proficient after a while. Okay, so lots of sample points, lots of different habitats. We're going to nail this. We're going to find out where this thing's living. Right. Try lots of sample methods. Well, we might as well. We're mentioning pitfall traps, vacuum sampling on the SARS. So we'll give that a go as well, just to see if we've got any wandering males and what have you. Right. So I decided to pick a site which to match those text references. So what we've got here, we've got a bit of salt marsh. We've got a bit of marram even, that was mentioned. We've got some embedded stones, haven't we? Sandy soil. So this is all sort of ticking the boxes. So yeah, it's a good place to look. So get your trusty little hand pickaxe, which I thought, well, embedded stones, I might not be able to lift them. So little hand axe might come in handy. Sure enough, embedded stones, sandy soil, nothing, absolutely nothing. And not many stones to really try either. So yeah, it wasn't looking too promising, this site, but I gave it a go anyway. And I thought, well, okay, subterranean spider. Let's actually go deep down and dig into its habitat and see where we can find it. So I found this patch of shingle, coastal shingle, and dug down adjacent to some of the soil and investigated some of the little voids to see if it was living in there. Thought this was probably very profitable, and I did actually find some very pallid pale money spiders in the voids down here. So I thought, yeah, must be it. Wasn't. It was another species altogether. So there you go. But I thought, well, it's an under-investigated habitat. Not many people are going to dig down to 1 foot down into shingle and actually look for spiders. So yeah, could get some interesting stuff. And funnily enough, going back to that whole character, I suddenly realised that Victorian entomologists were far more persistent than us, because they talk about digging down through rock piles to a depth of 6 foot to look for spiders. So yeah, we're not quite in the same league as them, but he didn't actually say whether he had help doing that. I suspect somebody else was doing the digging. Right. Well, little hand vacuum sampler. We'll try that as well. Just since we're there, we've cycled and trudged along a big sand dune system. We might as well throw everything at it. So a bit of hoovering on the grassland. There might be a wandering male there to pick out. Use a paintbrush to pick up off the tray. You don't want to be pootering in a sand dune system and filling your lungs with sand. So little wetsuit paintbrush, you can pick up the spiders then, transfer them to your sample pot. That didn't really work either. I didn't find it using that either. Right, well, marram, plenty of marram on a sand dune. And that was mentioned as a habitat. So sure enough, we'll try grubbing through this really thick, dense marram. If it's subterranean, it might like the really coarse, dense, damp vegetation that you sometimes find on dunes. Couldn't find it there either. Right, okay, back to the drawing board. What are we going to do? Right, we'll try pitfall traps. We'll set some pitfall traps out in the original habitat. We're going to put a grid over them to stop those catching shrews and what have you. Little domed lid to deflect the sand. So irrespective of which direction the wind's blowing, it's going to bounce over the trap, and I'm not just going to catch a cup full of sand. Propylene glycol in the bottom, so it's not toxic. I'll tell you more about that later. But we'll also try something else, because one of the SRS records suggested that quite a few specimens were being found in aerial pitfall traps. Now, I couldn't really imagine what an aerial pitfall trap would look like, so I decided to have a think and design one myself. So I got one of these plastic Jaeger bomb pops, and I burnt a central hole out of the shot well, and then conjured up a little piece of dowel, thinking that the spiders would walk along the ground, up the dowel, reach the top of the dome, and then maybe fall in the reservoir. And any spider dispersing and ballooning, this was going to work a treat. I was going to find Myosina blanda 10 a penny. Well, did I? there's what it looks like in reality. So quite a neat little contraption. It looks like it should work. And I didn't catch that much in there, but I did get lots of sandhoppers, which who would have thought sandhoppers like to climb? I suppose you learn something, but good for harvestmen, but pretty poor for spiders. Very little, just a few really common things in there. So, okay, well, we've tried that. There's my trapping station at pretty near the original site. So I had 6 of the aerial pitfall traps out there, and then further 6 more traditional ground pitfall traps in there. So I was catching lots of spiders using this method, and amazingly, they were surviving. They weren't being smashed up by livestock or curious sort of beachgoers. So, yeah, unfortunately, still couldn't find it. So this is getting frustrating now. I've put in a lot of hours and a lot of days looking for this thing. Right. Okay, let's go back to the very first reference, which is a continental work on that described Myosina blanda as new to science. Well, originally from Paris, sandy wood. Simon found it in a sandy wood near Paris. Well, Newborough Warren's got this huge Corsican pine plantation. Sand, well, sandy wood, worth a go, isn't it? So what do we do? Well, we dug through the humus layer that's built up since the plantation was put in. We got down to the sand layer. Yeah, we were finding a few little linophiids, little money spiders there, little pallid jobs, but they weren't it either. So, scratching head time. Well, where the heck is this thing living? Right. So I got on to the aerial photos. I obviously knew this site quite well and thought, well, let's think where else it might be. I need some stones, salt marsh, tidal vegetation. Well, I found this place on the Machtreith Cobb. And as you can see, there's a high tide line, spring tide line, various other tide lines. And I found these big boulders that obviously used these rocks to construct this cob to block the river to agriculturally improve upstream and keep the sea out. And these rocks were absolutely impossible to shift by hand. They were firmly embedded in this silty mud. So yeah, this sort of tallies with what Jackson was saying. Salt marsh vegetation, rocks embedded. Let's try that. And what this picture doesn't show is that this is late autumn. The wind was howling a gale and sample trays were blowing off over the cob and never to be seen again. So yeah, interesting. So I started turning these rocks, and sure enough, that ticks all the boxes. Big rock embedded, got it out with a hammer. There, trembling on a little fine silk web was this pallid spider, little tiny money spider. And that was it. I was absolutely convinced that was it. Got to be. It's right habitat. It's got the look of something rare. And yes, it was. I didn't get any photos of the spider in habitat. It was blowing such a gale. I thought I've just got to pot this thing, otherwise it's gone. And that'll be my eat out story for the rest of my life of how I almost found Myosina blanda. So yeah, quite a big rock, as you can see. Fairly featureless, really. So yeah, interesting. It just shows you the lengths you have to do to find these things. There's a lot of background research you've got to go through to try and uncover the truth and try and see some habitats. And don't take everything you read as fact either, because sometimes the people writing it haven't actually found it. So it's worth going back to the original source because it's got more detail in that really to pinpoint the habitat. So I thank Randall Jackson for actually writing exactly where he found it, because that helped me find it. All the subsequent references weren't that helpful really, apart from holes. So yeah, there we go. So the habitat was known after all. It just was lost in time, I suppose, is probably the truth. But this thing occurs inland as well, so it's obviously subterranean. It's just easier to find when it's clinging to the underside of a big rock that you can turn rather than digging through soil. It can always be tricky. Okay, so that's Myosina blanda found, and I only found one specimen in the whole survey, that huge survey. So I was quite pleased when I found that. But yeah, tricky species to find. Okay, so NRW decided, right, well, we want you to look for this thing, Origine welchi. Now, Origines are a nice little group of money spiders, black money spiders, and you often see them, they land on your clothes and after they've been ballooning, and you've got one or two really common species that even occur in garden and lawn. So by and large, people tend to dismiss them. They're seen as very common spiders that you don't pay much attention to. But there's actually one or two very rare Aragones that people hardly ever find. And you think, well, yeah, these are the things in a book that you flick over and go, I'll never find that. There's no point even looking at that. And this is one such species, this Arachne welchi, and nationally rare, classified as endangered. Very few sites, as you can see. So probably before this survey, you can forget quite a few of those spots as well. A lot of those are new. And not a lot of information. I remember Stan Dobson at Manchester Museum was telling me how he found this in Derbyshire and up in Scotland. And he said, oh, you've got to look in the really wet sphagnum, really sloppy stuff. It's difficult to survey. So, yeah, went in the back of the mind. So I'd only sort of come across this thing once before in a blanket bog in North Wales, and I was practically swimming to find it. So I was in July or June and quite warm. So I thought, yeah, this could be quite tricky to find, really. So I'll have another go. And I've been back to the original site. I couldn't find it on subsequent trips. So, yeah, this wasn't looking too promising. Right. Well, I know it likes saturated sphagnum lawn at a certain altitude. It seems to like it at about the 300 to 400 meter altitude. Blanket bog, gullies with this sphagnum lawn, like you can see in the background of me. So I decided I've got to sort of hone it down. There's no point just turning up at the blanket bog and hoping you stumble into the right spot. I decided to use QGIS, go over the aerial photographs and actually digitize all the sphagnum lawns in Wales that look suitable at the right altitude and categorize them sort of A, B, C, depending on what I thought was a good quality Arachne welchi site, based on sort of previous finds I've had. So at least I had somewhere to plug into my GPS so I could walk straight to it without sort of aimlessly walking around and just going to the quarry and maybe doing this acid grassland and just missing that. So you could easily miss some of these little pools. They're quite small. So if you've got them on your GPS, you can forget having mobile phone reception up there. You ain't going to get it. So you need a handheld GPS to take you straight to the spot and go, yep, there we are. We're in the right place. We're not walking aimlessly along this upland bog for hours looking for a needle in a haystack. So that was the job. That sort of limited the number of good quality sites I could explore, really. And this is what we're looking for, the real sloppy stuff. This isn't welly time. This is more than wellies. This is stuff that people go, oh no, it's far too dangerous. You don't want to go anywhere near that. This is it, saturated sphagnum lawn at altitude. Right, well, some of the sites, yeah, they do look quite dangerous. Sean the sheep obviously didn't have a very good time in the bog here. He'd obviously wandered in there, struggled a bit, and all we see now is a little outline of his fleece, and I think the ravens or red kites have picked off the rest of him. So yeah, it'll be tricky, but yeah, I think we're in the right habitat. We've certainly got sphagnum there in a very saturated area. I was thinking, well, how am I going to safely record on this sort of habitat? It doesn't look very safe, does it? And sort of heeded warnings from people that thought, well, in for a penny, in for a pound, and let's go the whole hog. But go on troll eBay and get a second-hand wetsuit, and we'll do this. So even if I did fall in, at least I'm not going to get cold. And I need to easily extract myself out just by swimming along the surface if necessary. So yeah, thankfully nobody was around much to see me doing this. In the wilds of the mountains, don your wetsuit, put your neoprene socks on, and then you're in there slopping around looking for these things. So yeah, you might look a bit like a Teletubby with the ear defenders on there, and you're quite brave. You're just going into where angels fear to tread. And you soon learn where not to stand. So this little central gully is obviously a very open flowing channel. That's very deep. You'll be up to your neck in there. So you soon learn not to go in that bit. Stick to where you can actually fall onto land. It's often quite a good idea because you will trip over. But unlike when you're wearing wellies will hold you into sphagnum. There's like a vacuum forms, and you can't pull your foot out, and it takes your welly with it. The welly stays behind. Whereas in a wetsuit, you just go in and out you come, because you can fold your foot up and out it comes through the hole that you've just created. So it is a lot safer in a wetsuit, and you can actually feel through the neoprene socks when you're on treacherous ground or more stable ground. So it's a bit safer that way. So that's what I did. And I'd found them at this site before, so I'd just surveyed around the edge. So I just dived in and went away. And you can see how windy it is. It seems to be a common thing in the mountains, quite windy. The grass is bending over. But yeah, I was full of it. I was pretty sure I was going to find it here. And yeah, you can end up in the drink. Yeah, that shows you how deep it can get. You obviously try and avoid going in that depth, especially if there's no one to help pull you out. But yeah, so you're using the vacuum sampler, the petrol vacuum sampler. It doesn't mind if it touches a bit of water and spews it out as a fountain. And you're staying warm. You've got your neoprene swimming gloves on. You're not going to get cold, and you're going to survive even in that chilly temperatured water in April or whenever it was I was there. Okay, so you're actually in the habitat. You've got its microhabitat. You know you're in the site where it already occurs. Happy days. You're smiling away there. You know you're going to find it. So always great when you've found that ecology for the spider. You know where you're looking, and you're confident you're going to get it, and you're going to get good records for your report. Brilliant. Of course, it doesn't always work like that. So you can pick sites that are absolutely rubbish. They look fantastic on the aerial photographs. When you get there, they're not like it. They've either been burnt heavily in the past, so you're seeing a lot of Molinia grass here, so symptomatic of a different management regime from the nice quality habitats. And a nice big golf umbrella can save your life sometimes. You can hide under there with your sample tray, keep out of the way of all the rain there. I wasn't looking best pleased because I think it dawned on me that I wasn't going to find it at this site. It just wasn't quite right, even though we'd trudged quite a way over here. So yeah, it doesn't always go to plan, but you've got to look, otherwise you don't find. So there's the habitat, real sloppy sphagnum. I thought, well, the vacuum finds it fairly well, but I'd like to actually see what it's actually doing in that sphagnum. I don't just want to suck it blind out of the sphagnum and say, oh, it lives in sphagnum. Let's actually get on hands and knees and find it. So we know it's this really saturated sphagnum. There's one or two species of sphagnum that do this, and I've sent samples off to a bryologist and they've told me which ones they are, but I can't remember them off the top of my head. So it's this stuff that protrudes slightly above the water, but it's always got to be in this deep, cool water where it can survive. So I guess pools that dry up in summer, probably less suitable for it, really. So not good with this June drought that we've had, really. So sure enough, there's a little web on the right sphagnum, and yeah, I actually took the spider out of this web, and sure enough, it was an adult male Arachne welchii. But actually, in doing this talk, I noticed, I wonder if that was the Arachne welchii sat in the web before I even started exploring it. Certainly is a male lineage, so unless it was a different species that's not in that particular web. So these little jeweled webs are what you can go for. So if you haven't got a vacuum, look for the little jeweled webs on the saturated sphagnum, part them slightly with your two thumbs, and then the spider will show itself. And if you're lucky, you'll get Arachne welchii. And there we go. There's the Arachne welchii with a large pyrata friend. Now, it's quite different as welchii in that it's got this very curved apophysis on the palp. Whereas a lot of the common species just have a simple shark fin shape to it. Interestingly, they don't seem to get eaten by other spiders. I've noticed sort of this bit of a unit of a spider you'd have thought would do made short change of a little spider like that, but they don't seem to bother it. I don't know whether there's some sort of chemicals that they're exuding or they're just distasteful or something, but maybe a little project for somebody there. So there we go. That's Arachne welchii, really obscure thing. Well, in North Wales, we've also got this thing called Baryphyma gowerense. Now, clues in the name, gowerense. It's named after Gower Peninsula in South Wales. So that's where it was first found and described from. Another national rare, vulnerable spider. And throughout Britain, it's pretty much restricted to good quality fenland habitats. Sort of East Anglia, there's a couple of sites, Anglesey Fens on the Clean. in South Wales, it's more on salt marsh in Juncus maritimus. Also in sphagnum bogs, fairly high, but not as high as Welchie. So it's an unusual thing, and you just think, well, why isn't it more widespread? It seems very restricted. It's very much a Welsh specialist. So it hadn't been seen in North Wales since 1988, when they did a big extensive Welsh peatland invert survey for CCW, one of the predecessors of NRW. So NRW wanted me to refine this thing in North Wales to update the records. We want to know, is it still there? Okay. So what do you do? Well, you go straight to the habitat where it was last found, the exact field. There's some good grid references for where it was found. So it makes sense to go back there and start your search there. Well, there we go. We got a few cows on there, obviously fen vegetation. And I hoovered this for hours and not a trace of it. It should be here. If the hoover, nobody's tried hoovering for it. It should be coming out in numbers, and I'm at the right time of year, and the pitfall specimens were found. So what's going on here? So after about 3 sample stations here, I gave up and thought, well, I've got to try a different approach here. So there's a standard vacuum sampler that he'd use, a good powerful one. Works a treat, but it wasn't finding it in this original habitat. Okay, so the nice thing when you're working for working on the project with NRW is that they've often got NVC maps, National Vegetation Community maps, and NRs. And sure enough, of course, of the Rainyog here, mapped in exquisite detail with all the different vegetation types. So it got me thinking, well, the original field doesn't look particularly exciting. It's even described as M25 species poor. Well, for a motorway around London, that's not surprising, is it? But it wasn't in this vegetation structure. Okay, well, I wonder if those were dispersing individuals that are probably coming in from an adjacent habitat. So I thought, well, rare spider needs a rare habitat, otherwise people would have found it far more frequently. Okay, what do these Anglesey fens have that's quite restricted and unusual and might hold something a bit rare? So they've actually got this Scienus nigricans, this black bog rush sea pidgers. I thought, well, they sound quite interesting, and a lot of other entomologists raved about them, saying, well, they're very good for various odonata and diptera. So it makes sense to have a look at these. Well, I might not find it, but I'll give it a go. There's not many spots of it on the map. There's a few patches. I think it's this nice purple colour. Yeah, so many different habitats, but I think it's this purple colour. So there's a few patches, and we'll just narrow my search, and that's quite a big site. So yeah, good idea. We'll try that. Got there. Didn't look too dissimilar to that first site, but it's a lot more rich in black bog rush. So all of this spiky stuff isn't just any old grassy thing. It's black bog rush, which is quite nice. Very tussocky. And on the first vacuum, out pops this interesting linny with peculiar pin-cushioned hairs sticking out of its abdomen. It's quite unusual. I thought, well, that's different. I've never seen anything like that. And yeah, sure enough, that was Parify McGowerense. So it just shows you homing in on the habitat, thinking what's unusual about that reserve where it lives and where might it be, and narrowing your options just to home in on that ecology for that species, because none of this is written down anywhere. You just got to learn it on the job almost. So there we go. We've tried lots of different sites across the site. These are 1 km grids, and sure enough, virtually all the records were associated with that. Not in 25 M13 habitat A and B. So they were all nice Scienus flushers, very interesting looking habitats. So not all of them produced it, but I think that was just a case that I didn't find it there. But certainly that original field, I'd tried intensively to find it there, and it wasn't obvious. I guess there's 1 or 2 specimens in there, but yeah, you were finding them multiple numbers at some of these sites. So that seems to be its favoured habitat on this site. Yeah, when you go down to Gower, you'll find it in that Juncus maritimus, 10 a penny. You can be in there and you can just find loads in a very short time. So peculiar. I think it's more the tussocky structure that it's going for. Not too fussed about salinity. But then why, if it lives in upland sphagnum, don't you find it more widely in Britain? It's an odd thing. It is an early season maturer, so I guess a lot of people will miss it if they go in the sort of traditional summertime survey season. Right, let's go for another bog species. I'll widen this a bit and move it away from spiders, I think. So Microbicium brevifemoratum, probably one of our rarest pseudoscorpions, little tiny job. That's a millimetre scale bar, so give you some idea. For a long time, I think it's only known from three sites in Britain, something like that. There is another one that isn't reported on yet, but yeah, will come out in time. But Korsvochno has been mentioned as a location for this, but strangely enough, I mentioned it to NRW and they have no recollection of this species. Said, no, we don't know about this thing at all. Well, it's on the internet, you can find it. Turns out that although the specimen had been found and sent off for identification, nobody had actually bothered to tell NRW that they had these rare species on their site. So yeah, they seem quite keen on trying to find a bit more information about this. So I'd actually turned up one of these specimens on with another survey and thought, well, okay, let's suggest this to them and see if they go for it. Problem with Korsvochno is it's massive and it's a huge lowland raised bog, coastal raised bog. And on the face of it, it looks quite homogeneous. It doesn't look very varied. It all looks the same habitat, doesn't it? That's what I thought when I first started visiting raised bogs. I thought, well, it's just one big block of habitat. Oh no, there's subtle micro-habitats in raised bogs that you've got to be aware of to hone in on some of these goodies. Otherwise, you'll miss them because you could be walking kilometres again and just not hit the right habitat. So thinking about that GIS, that aerial photo analysis to go to the right micro-habitats. So boardwalk across the original raised bog dome. In theory, the original specimen was found in this area. Well, when I asked NRW, they said, well, we had pitfall traps in that area. It was down here in the historical cut bog where locals were harvesting peat. Well, okay, well, yeah, fair enough. I had turned up an original specimen here, so I did know that, yeah, that sounds right. They're saying it's in the same place where I found it before. Okay, let's focus all our sampling effort in that type of habitat. We'll look for the wettest sphagnum in these old peat cuttings and try and find it there. We'll throw in a few of the patterned mire bog pools just for good measure because that's probably its original habitat on raised bogs. Right. So when I first found it, I was looking for Heliophanes damphi, I think, on here. Rare jumping spider that you only find on raised bogs, and I actually stumbled across this and I looked at it. I thought, hey, that looks like Microbicium habitat. That, and well, since I'm here, I might as well have a go. It's speculative, and yeah, sure enough, one popped out on the tray, and I thought, well, fair enough. I must know what the habitat looks like because I didn't find it on any other spot in that previous survey. So bore this one in mind and decided I'd go back to this site for the proper pseudoscorpion survey. So pseudoscorpions are quite small, difficult to find. Yeah, surprisingly difficult to find actually, especially in a bog that size. So I bought myself some ultra magnification glasses, try and make sure I found it. And yeah, the problem is they get stuck on the meniscus of the tray, so they're essentially immobile. So you're often relying on movement on the tray to see things. Now these things are just stuck flat, as though they're stuck down, so you haven't got that trigger to see them. So these glasses work to treat. We just use them to scrutinize the tray and pick out these little tiny 1 millimeter long pseudoscorpions. Didn't find many, but yeah, sure enough, there were in those best quality sphagnum areas once again. So that just sort of shows you could be looking in the wrong habitat at the right site. You just never find it, and you've got to hone in on it. So there we go, a bit of a rubbish photo, but get the impression. small and unphotographable. Pseudoscorpions, people naturally think about Tulgren funnels, so I had permission to take a small sample of sphagnum from some of these pools just to have a go, see if I could extract one from the sphagnum. Maybe they were just being deep in the sphagnum and not coming out. Well, I tried a couple of sphagnum patches that looked sensible without wrecking the habitat entirely, and no, nothing but a few mites and a couple of springtails. So yeah, it seems that's not the best method to find them really without doing untold damage to a fragile habitat. So I think vacuum sampling for this species is the way forward in autumn, and looking for those islands in the middle of the sphagnum lawns, and they seem to be on those islands in the raised bogs. But yeah, some sites look good for it, wasn't there, so it's a fussy devil. And speaking to arachnologists in Denmark where they found them, they say that as well. They say it's only on the very best quality raised bogs. It's not on just any old bit of place with a sphagnum. It's got to be something special. So yeah, and we were quite pleased. We had a few spots on the map showing where it was. So now we've got a bit more information about its ecology from that site. It informs the conservation of it, obviously. Okay, so Taniptera Trust, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, Gary and Leanna up at Liverpool Museum. They wanted me to look for Rhizodromus phallax, this philodromid spider, nationally rare, vulnerable, few coastal sites in Britain. Haven't been recorded for a while in the northwest, so the records updating, and we can try and track down some more populations if we were lucky. So the problem is that it sits on sand and it's practically invisible, as this picture shows. So they're the tips of its legs. It's got amazing camouflage really on sand, and yeah, I've seen it before, but yeah, well, I was skeptical I was going to find this again. So we'll give it a go. Right, going back to that old Jackson character, he'd found it on the Wirral. I went back to the original site. Sand dunes don't look too clever here anymore, do they? A bit of rock armament's gone in since Jackson's time. This was to stop sand blowing onto the sand hills and ruining a golf course that was having a lot of sand blowing onto it at the time. So yeah, my hopes weren't high at this point. This wasn't looking good. Right, he lives on sand dunes and bare sand. Well, where do you start? Sand dunes can be quite wide and plenty of mobile sand on there, plenty of marram. Okay, well, you could start searching anywhere. You could go in that blowout, for instance. You could go up at the front, fixed dunes, whatever, along the paths. Where am I going to look? Well, that's the problem. The literature wasn't very specific. It just said sand dunes with free running sand. And yeah, fortunately, I'd found the species before in Wales, and it was on the frontal dune system. So right up at the edge where the first embryo dunes are forming and you get these big tussocks and marram. So yeah, makes sense. If I found it there before, let's focus on that microhabitat. Let's not worry about the inland dunes. We've searched those on other surveys before. Always drawn a blank for phallax. So let's go to where we know it occurs. And here we go. We went pretty close to the original spot where Chris Felton had specimens, Formby Point. Yeah, I'd searched quite a few sites, as you'll see in a map. Came across this clump, looked like it was providing a bit of cover there. Let's see what's in that little clump there. It's not very big. Sure enough, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think I counted over 10. It could have been 13, 16. I'd have to look in the report, but lots of Rhizodromus phallax living in that one clump, but very, very concentrated. I just found them in these concentrated blobs. They're nothing for kilometers. Yeah, very strange. So, you know, what's going on here? Odd. Nice looking spider, very photogenic, as you can see. Beautiful thing. But there's also been things written about saying that it's the only philodromid that occurs in this habitat. Oh, no, it isn't. Some of the Aureolus group that you'll find in the thick marram here. So you've got to be a bit careful. You've got to make sure you've got a bona fide phallax, and with these markings, no problem at all. Yeah, good thing. So I think I've walked pretty much a massive extent of Lancashire's coast looking for this thing and into Cheshire. So we tried the Wirral population, we tried some speculative searches at some of the remnant dunes, this area here. The red spots are where I actually got positive records, and I think that was, what, 2 kilometre stretch around Formby Point, and you can see how the extent looked quite far and wide up onto the Fylde, not there from what I could find. So interesting. Why was it there and nowhere else? And I think it's down to the amount of footfall keeping the sand mobile. So many of the other frontal dunes are quite fixed. They haven't got the sort of wind blow quite like Formby, where you get a lot of holidaymakers and day trippers going down and trudging the dunes and opening up the marram and getting that sand flowing and mobile again. So possibly one example where intensive tourist pressure is actually benefiting a species, where usually it's the other way around. So certainly on some of the places where the fescue was growing down onto the coast where it's totally fixed, not a sign of this species. So quite interesting little survey, really. Right, so we're up in the mountains here. This is a Cadair Idris survey that I'm currently doing, and this is just to show you that things don't always go to plan. So yeah, you pile up your backpack with lots of pitfall traps to try and monitor this unusual montane assemblage of invertebrates. And you think, well, I know how windy it is. Pitfall traps won't survive up there unless you design some little domed covers that will deflect the wind from all directions. Keep them low so the wind can't get under them and blow them away. Peg them down with tent pegs. Use propylene glycol, non-toxic preservative that's not going to kill any mammals or what have you. We've got the mesh covers on there. Yeah, this will work a treat. We'll be finding all the rarities in no time here because people haven't been pitfalling up here for a while. Okay, well, unfortunately, some of the local residents had other ideas. So can you see the nice cloven hoof on my spray painted camouflage lids? Well, the sheep decided in the drought that pitfall fluid was quite nice to drink. So obviously they deliberately targeted every single pitfall trap, poured it up, smashed up the lids, often pulled out the cups and split them with their hooves and threw them far and wide. And I thought, well, okay, they've maybe accidentally trod on these things. Well, no, we're actually targeting them. There's no doubt about it. Every single one was up. It wasn't like it was half of them gone. It was every single one. So you've trudged up 800 meters with all the heavy kit, with all pitfall fluid, and you're confronted with very little return for your efforts. What a pain. What can I do? Well, let's try reinforcing them with some mesh baskets. That sounds good. So found these on a shop that sells things for £1. Brilliant little wire baskets. I can tent peg them over. Brilliant. They're going to solve it. Sheep aren't going to get anywhere near them, or they're going to be put off and not bother. Well, yeah, worked on the first round, but these things aren't as stupid as you realise. And I've heard from the person I'm surveying with that, yeah, they have actually gone up there and they've got round this as well. So they've poured up the baskets, smashed up the traps. So we've got no catch from this station. So I think we're at the point now where we're probably going to have to abandon this station because the hefted sheep here knows that little discarded plastic cups have got nice sweet juice in that is non-toxic and food grade. Now, I guess they've learned that from discarded rubbish. So hill walkers might have thrown the odd pop canister away, bottle of what have you. And these sheep are not stupid. They know that, oh yeah, a bit of plastic, there could be a bit of food remnants on there. We'll go for that. More interesting than eating this coarse grass and what have you. So there we go. Doesn't always go to plan. So worth bearing in mind. So what have we learned from these sort of case studies? Well, research that old ecology. Look, go back to it. Sometimes it doesn't get carried into the modern literature. Have a look, see what the people actually found it say. Learn to recognise a microhabitat. Once you've found it in a microhabitat, look out for it wherever you go, and it'll maximise your chance of encountering these rarities. Plan your research. Don't just go to a site blind and go, oh, I'm just going to fumble around and look for this rarity. Actually, look on the aerial photographs. We've got such good digital resources now that you can actually pinpoint the actual microhabitat from satellite images, plug it into your GPS, and then walk straight to it. It's a time saver. Also use that to scope your survey site. Where you're going to park, how are you going to access that site? All time saved is more time in the field looking for your rare spider. And it's a numbers game at the end of the day. The more you look, the more likely you are to find it. But there's a few little pointers there that can help you maximize your chance of finding these rare spiders. And obviously try as many different survey methods as possible. Don't assume that if it's been found once in a tin mine in Cornwall, that's its habitat. Okay, it might have been brought down on some hay used by the pit ponies or what have you. Who knows? So don't get skewed by these little wildcard references to microhabitat. Try and hone it down a bit more. And yeah, if there isn't much known, try different methods. Find one that works, and then use the method that works, and then you can then go and refine this rare spider at similar habitats that you might have found using NVC charts or knowledge from other recorders. Botanists are often your best friend because they'll know of a rare plant that is associated with that habitat. Go to BSPI website and look for where that rare plant occurs, and then go to those sites, because that's doing a lot of the homework for you. Spider's not associating with the plant, it's associating with the habitat or the conditions where that plant is living, and it will just help you turn these things up. Obviously, you've got to keep an open mind. Not all rare spiders live in fancy bogs, some of them live in heathlands and what have you, so think about that too. And time and effort, and that's it. So I think we can close the presentation and open it up for questions, Kieran.